Get ready for a new adventure filled with surprises and action, so sit back and enjoy. The amazing story starts with Wallace and Gromit reporting a penguin named Macro. He's been caught trying to steal the famous blue diamond and is sent to prison. But instead of a regular jail, he ends up in a zoo, where the guards make it clear he won't be escaping anytime soon. Macro isn't too thrilled about this and starts plotting his revenge against Wallace and Gromit, who are celebrated as heroes for stopping him. And he doesn't take that news well. He just sits there, waiting for his chance to get back at them. Meanwhile, as dawn breaks, Wallace's inventions wake up Gromit in their usual quirky way, even serving him breakfast right in his mouth. It's clear they have gadgets for everything. Gromit approaches the table to enjoy his cereal, but then the invention malfunctions and milk spills all over him. Wallace tells him it needs some calibration and asks him to come closer to calm down. But when Gromit gets closer, he realizes Wallace is using a device to soothe him, which he doesn't like at all. Wallace then mentions he's working on another invention that will really impress Gromit. After a while, we see Gromit tending to his garden, which he has taken care of for years. He just planted a new flower to make it even prettier. Suddenly, Wallace shows up with a big surprise that he believes will help Gromit with his gardening, since he knows how hard Gromit has worked on it for so long. He shows him a cool robot he built, which he named Orbit. Orbit is designed to assist with all gardening tasks. When Orbit activates, he starts checking out the garden and realizes it needs a few tweaks based on his programming. Gromit isn't too sure about this, but he tries to be okay with it because of Wallace's encouragement. However, as Orbit makes adjustments, he ends up cutting the leaves that Gromit worked so hard to plant. Gromit feels helpless as he watches his years of effort, including a tiny plant he just put in, get destroyed. When Orbit finishes, he tells Gromit it was nice to help, but Gromit sees that his garden looks completely different now. It's all minimalistic and bare. Neighbors notice the change and ask Wallace where he got the robot, and he proudly says he built it himself. They then ask if he rents it out to help with their gardens. Wallace gets a great idea and calls a friend to help him with it. Gromit rushes over, but Wallace reveals he was actually talking to Orbit. Gromit watches them leave while he thinks about how to fix his garden. On the other hand, the head of the authorities, Macintosh, is relaxing when his new officer arrives. He tells the officer to follow his orders because this world is real, and he should forget everything he learned at the academy. The officer then spots Macro, which makes Macintosh nervous, but he soon remembers that the picture of Macro was behind him when he was told to use his knowledge to catch him. In reality, he just answered the phone when Wallace reported it. The officer mentions that the zoo doesn't seem very safe, as she sees many ways to escape. However, Macintosh quickly reassures her that it's impossible for him to get away. He suggests the officer send her to do some work instead. Meanwhile, Wallace is busy working on their new business idea, which turns out to be a van. Gromit arrives and notices this, but what really catches his attention is the business name, Wallace and Norbot, which makes him feel sad. At the same time, some reporters show up to interview Wallace about his new invention. Wallace takes this chance to promote himself on TV, knowing it's free advertising. He announces that his invention is one of a kind and asks Norbot to demonstrate it. Norbot quickly starts a new project, creating something that looks a lot like the reporter, which grabs the audience's attention. Soon, many people want to hire him. Unfortunately, this news reaches Macro. He hears everything and realizes Wallace become very famous. Now, he soon begins with his magnificent plans where we notice that he needs a special glove that the guard has. He manages to get it with very cleverness. Here, Gromit is busy knitting a suit for his owner like he always does, but Norbot realizes he's not making it very fast. In no time, he creates a fantastic suit for his master, which impresses Wallace. Meanwhile, Gromit starts to lose his patience and doesn't know how to deal with the robot. At night, Gromit is ready to relax and play some soothing music to help him read. But then he notices someone sneaking into his room and it's Norbot. Gromit tries to ignore him, but soon he sees Norbot turning off his radio and plugging it into charge. The problem is that Norbot is making a lot of noise, which makes it hard for Gromit to concentrate. Gromit just wants to sleep, but the noise keeps getting louder. He hopes to let the robot charge so he can finally rest, but after a long wait, Norbot says it's only at 1% battery. Frustrated, Gromit decides to take the robot somewhere else to charge it. He heads down to the basement to find a plug, but everyone seems busy. So, he connects it directly to the computer. On the other hand, Macro is busy with his new inventions, and he's working on something big, a giant hand. He's excited to use it soon, which he uses to escape from his cell. While the guard is asleep, he takes the chance to move forward and notices that he has the keys. However, instead of using them, he heads straight to the computer connected to the database to look for information about Wallace. Just then, he realizes the guard is about to wake up, so he cleverly prevents him from sneezing. Once that's sorted, he continues with his plan and logs into the computer using Wallace's account. Unfortunately, he discovers that it's password protected. He tries a few guesses, but none work. Then he spots a photo and remembers that Wallace loves cheese, which gives him an idea. He tries cheese as the password, and it works. Once inside the system, he finds out that Wallace has a riddle to solve, where he needs to pick out different types of cheese. He even figures out that Wallace thinks of the moon as cheese. After selecting the right options, he gains access to all of Wallace's documents. This leads him to the programming for Norbot, and he quickly learns how it operates. Macro changes Norbot from nice mode to evil mode and makes a few more tweaks. Soon, Norbot receives the update and turns evil. Soon, he gets busy making more copies of himself. Meanwhile, Macro, knowing what he has done, just waits for his sweet revenge, hoping the robots will do their job. The next day, Gromit wakes up like usual, and he has already adjusted to how the Wallace machines work. However, he notices that Norbot is acting really weird and looks much more unsettling. When Wallace shows up, he doesn't notice anything strange because he's too focused on the orders from his clients. Wallace tells Gromit they might need more robots, but Norbot reassures him that it's not a big deal since he has already taken care of it. Gromit starts to worry as he realizes that many robots have been created. Wallace, on the other hand, is thrilled with his work and even seems to know what orders are coming next. Wallace then sees he has a lot of requests, so he leaves Norbot to handle things while Gromit decides to follow them, sensing they might be up to something. They start sending out robots all over the city, and soon the robots are arriving at people's homes to do their jobs. It looks like they're doing everything right, and everyone seems happy. But Gromit starts to worry that he made a mistake. Suddenly, it seems like they have betrayed Gromit, who is left locked inside one of the houses. Gromit calls out for help, but even Norbot notices and doesn't do anything. Meanwhile, the clients begin to notice that they are missing a lot of things, like glass and tools, which makes them suspicious of the robots. Norbot and the others hide in Wallace's garage, where they come up with a plan. The officer gets flooded with calls from people reporting the thefts. Just then, Macintosh arrives and learns about the situation. The new officer tells him that everything is connected and that Wallace, the new inventor, is behind it all. Macintosh wants to arrest Wallace, but the new officer says they need proof first. At the same time, Wallace is at home, being taken care of by the gnomes. They want to keep him busy so he doesn't get suspicious, so they make him as comfy as possible, even whipping up some hot chocolate. This makes him sleepy, and he soon drifts off. Meanwhile, Gromit is trying to escape from where he's locked up. He quickly makes his way back home and finds Wallace resting peacefully. Gromit decides to check on the robots and discovers they're in the garage working on some strange projects that don't look good at all. He wants to sneak a peek at what they're doing, but accidentally makes a noise that alerts them. Suddenly, they all notice he's there, and he gets scared and runs away. Gromit wakes up Wallace to tell him what's happening, and he takes him to the garage to show him. But when they arrive, the robots clean the garage with water, making it look like they're just doing their jobs. Wallace is impressed and tells them they're doing great work, ignoring Gromit's shocked expression. Just then, there's a knock at the door. Wallace opens it and finds officers there, ready to investigate. They inform him they're going to take all of his inventions for analysis. Wallace, with no other choice, lets them in and tells them the first things they'll check are the robots, since they seem to be the cause of the trouble. But mysteriously, the robots have vanished. The next day, Gromit and Wallace wake up as if everything is normal. But Wallace soon discovers that all his technology is gone. He tries to go about his day, but without his gadgets, he feels completely lost. Gromit tries to help him, but he realizes Wallace doesn't even know how to make tea without his tech. Wallace is shocked that people doubted his robots, reminding Gromit that he designed them to help him in the garden. Still, Wallace stays hopeful, believing the police will return his stuff soon. Just then, he hears a knock at the door and thinks it's the police, so he rushes to open it. Unfortunately, a crowd of people is there to complain, saying Wallace's robots took their things. They demand refunds and want to know where the robots are. Wallace, confused, admits he has no idea where they went, making him look even more suspicious. He tells Gromit that if they don't find the robots soon, he'll be blamed for everything. Gromit realizes they need to act fast, but when he tries to use the car, he finds it has no engine or tires because the robots took everything. Luckily, Gromit remembers he has a motorcycle hidden away, so he quickly grabs it to search for the missing robots. Meanwhile, the officers are looking into Wallace's devices, but find no evidence. They need to locate the robots directly and analyze them to figure out what's going on. At the same time, Gromit sneaks in and grabs a few inventions that will help him track the robots. Thanks to these gadgets, he spots them on his radar. He rushes to their location, excited to finally find them. However, he notices they are studying a van, so he has to park quickly and realizes the robots are about to show up right there. The tension builds as Gromit gets ready to catch them, but despite their closeness, he can't see them anywhere. Soon, he discovers they are actually moving through the sewers, and worse, they are heading straight for the zoo. Gromit climbs a tree to spy on them and sees that Macro is at the zoo, living a good life. Suddenly, a ship emerges from the pool, revealing Norbot and his robots. Gromit realizes that Macro is controlling them all. They start their evil plans, with the first step being to get out of the zoo. So, Gromit understands that the villain has returned to finish what he started, and Macro has spotted him, signaling Norbot to get rid of Gromit. We see how this causes a tree to break and fall, and Gromit ends up falling too. At that moment, Norbot lands on his back, right where its reset button is. Gromit notices they both fell into a cell, but not just any cell, it's a lion's. The lion is hungry and ready to eat, but Gromit quickly dodges it and manages to escape. Meanwhile, Norbot returns to his original self and becomes good again. The lion, realizing it needs a good haircut, gets a trim in no time. Gromit sees that Norbot is back to being good, so he saves him from being the lion's dinner. Together, they decide to find the other robots and head straight to the festival. They discover that the blue diamond will be presented there, which is exactly what Macro wants to steal. Gromit quickly figures this out and rushes to the event. He looks out the window and sees Macintosh taking the blue diamond, which was supposed to be guarded. But then everyone notices that the defiant one is gone, replaced by a rotten turnip. Confused, Macintosh remembers that it's the day of Wallace, and he realizes there was a switch made without him knowing. At the same time, Gromit checks his radar and sees that the bad guys are at Wallace's house, confirming it's all a trap. Meanwhile, Wallace is at home, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, he hears a loud noise and realizes that a secret passage is opening in his garage, where Macro's submarine is arriving. Shortly after, Gromit rushes into the house, looking for Wallace. He hears a voice from another room saying everything is fine, but then he notices that the robots are turning against him. They trap him, and soon he is caught. Meanwhile, the officers are becoming more convinced that Wallace is behind all the trouble. Macintosh orders his team to go after Wallace. When they return, they find themselves tied up, and Wallace finally figures out that the robots are evil. He asks them why they turned bad since he didn't program them that way. At that moment, Wallace realizes that Macro is the one pulling the strings and seeking revenge. Macro seems particularly interested in a vase, which ends up breaking, revealing the real blue diamond inside. This triggers a memory of the past when Macro hid the diamond while the authorities were distracted. He had planned everything all along. They leave Wallace and his friends locked up as they escape. Meanwhile, Gromit and Wallace realize they're not alone in the house and quickly call for help. Norbot sees them, but without noticing them, he goes to clean. Then, luckily, Gromit comes up with a plan using a blower. They noticed that Norbot was with them, and it looked like they knocked down some officers who had just arrived at his house. Gromit and Wallace caught up with Macro, trying to explain that he again making a mistake. But, as usual, Macro ignored him and kept going while the boys followed closely behind. They moved ahead until Macro reached a dock and jumped onto a boat. Just then, Wallace and the others showed up, having managed to free themselves. When they saw that the evil Macro was trying to escape, they quickly grabbed another boat, leading to an exciting chase where they pushed their engines to the limit. They didn't even fast then an old lady. Meanwhile, the authorities noticed they were on boats and told Wallace and Gromit to stop, as they would have to face the consequences of their actions. The robots started throwing trash at them, trying to sink their boat. Gromit urged Wallace to use one of his inventions to help them out. At the same time, the officers realized they were chasing Macro, and the smart officer alerted his boss. But Macintosh, seeing the situation, thought it was just a nun because Macro had disguised himself. Just then, Wallace bursts onto the scene with one of his cool inventions, a shoe launcher. He quickly starts firing at the evil robots, but they dodge the shots. But the shoes come again from behind and hit their reset button. Wallace doesn't give up until he manages to get all the robots back under control, and soon they're all on their ship. But then they realize that Macro is missing. They find out he's taken a super fast boat and is trying to escape. Luckily, Gromit manages to catch up with him, but Wallace ends up falling into the water. Gromit quickly throws him a life preserver to help him out. Gromit is right behind Macro, and he soon reaches his ship. This sets the stage for an epic showdown between Gromit and Macro, where Gromit reveals Macro's true identity to everyone. Just then, Wallace falls right into action while the authorities are ready to take down Macro. They quickly maneuver their ship to flip it over, and Gromit grabs the diamond, but Macro threatens him, saying he'll drop him if Gromit doesn't hand it over. Gromit hesitates, but Wallace tells him to give it up because he's more important than the diamond. In a moment of bravery, Gromit finally hands it over, but Macro is still up to no good. As the boat starts to tip, Gromit tries to escape and reach Wallace, who is reaching out for him. But Gromit realizes he can't make it, and it looks like he might lose his friend. Just when it seems hopeless, Gromit notices that a group of robots is getting closer, and soon they all come together. However, he seems unsure about being rescued. Just as his friends are about to reunite, officers show up and interrupt everything, telling them that something much more urgent is happening. They remind everyone that the villain Macro is stealing the diamond, and he's bragging from a distance, claiming he already has it and that they can't stop him. He pulls it out of his bag to flaunt it, but then he realizes he's been tricked with a robot. Gromit shows him that he made a swap just like before, and the officers are thrilled to have saved him while Macro is left behind on the train. Officer Macintosh tells Wallace that he's innocent now that he knows the whole story. He thanks them for helping to get the diamond back and mentions that he's retiring from his position. He plans to hand over his role to a new officer who has proven to be very smart and capable. After all this, Wallace has a surprise for him that makes Gromit a bit anxious. Wallace reassures him that he makes the same robots as before, and he plans to use them to create his dream garden. This movie teaches us that seeking revenge doesn't lead to good outcomes and often creates more problems. In the end, what truly matters are the friendships and teamwork we build. For instance, Wallace and Gromi show us that no matter how tough things get, real strength comes from trusting each other and using our creativity to solve problems. If you enjoyed the video, please share it, like it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video, and thanks for watching.